Daryl Neighbors is the Dean for Admissions and Recruitment at Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine. He earned a BA in Political Science from Whittier College and later an MS in Electronic Business Systems from Golden Gate University, 2003. After early work in banking and teaching program in Houston, he built a long career in education, largely in the Bay Area, and transitioned into admissions and financial aid leadership in 2002. He is currently producing an EDD at Loyola University Chicago.
Thank you, Rama, Marco, Jobin. It's very nice to be here. I am excited to share some insights about our fine institution, Loyola University Chicago. I'm going to share my screen here and provide you with a little bit of background information about our program. And hopefully give you some insights. I know that there's a lot of questions about standing out, sort of providing a unique application. All of those considerations are hopefully part of this exploration of our institution. I always like to start with really the two items that I think will help you stand out the most. It may seem simplistic, but I think it is a very important consideration to be unique and to be prepared. So we'll talk a little bit about how to do both. And in that context, I'll provide you with a little bit more information about our institution. So as you can see in the inset here, this is a traditional statement from a Jesuit institution. We are a Jesuit medical school, which means that we are founded on principles and pedagogy established by the Society of Jesus, which is the Jesuit order of the Catholic Church. And there are a lot of different unique qualities about our medical school that are factored into that pedagogical structure. So we like to consider ourselves Chicago's Catholic University. I don't know if you're too familiar with Chicago, so I tried to provide a little bit of a map here. The dark void there is our version of an ocean. It's Lake Michigan. Okay. Most of the beautiful scenic sites that you see associated with Loyola University Chicago tend to be campuses that are right there on the lake, including our main campus at Rogers Park. We have our Root Bay College campus, which is our junior college campus. We have our Water Tower campus, all these nice locations. Here's where we are. So we don't get the scenic vista, but we have a really amazing and diverse catchment area, which is what we refer to when we consider our patients who are drawn to us by virtue of their zip code and location. The main neighborhoods around us and where predominantly our students live, Oak Park and Forest Park. We are actually incorporated in Maywood. Maywood is the sort of zip code that we share for not only our physical structure of a campus, but the adjacent campus next to us, which is also one of our rotation campuses. That's the Hines VA Hospital. So we have two academic medical centers right next to each other here in Maywood. And this is the sort of aerial view of our Loyola University campus. So in the foreground here is Loyola University Medical Center. Okay. You can see our main hospital here. This is our translational research facility. This is the medical school back here, our pediatric hospital. And in the background there is the Hines VA Hospital. As far as our medical center is concerned, it is a level 1 trauma center. It has the largest burn center in the state of Illinois, which is something we immediately recognize every 4th of July, unfortunately. We have a cancer center. We are uniquely qualified and skilled in solid organ and bone marrow transplants. And one thing that's not listed here, we have the largest in-state psychiatric facility on our campus at Madden Hospital. And again, we are adjacent to a VA hospital. So that's a really good opportunity for seeing different types of cases. The element of medical school that makes that experience somewhat unique is, in fact, the types of cases that you see. And so I'll talk a little bit about the cases we predominantly see in our catchment area with respect to our medical center, which is a private Catholic hospital. But when it comes to a VA hospital, there's a regional draw and affiliation and regional catchment area. So again, that will be based on servicemen and women affiliating with some element of our care model. We have a spinal cord center, for example, a blindness center. So again, regional referrals are typically what drive the patient dynamic there. And then really sort of to give you some insights on what I mean by the diversity of cases, there is a metric out there, lots of interesting metrics that are created. This metric was created, I believe, by Cranes, which is a publication, a business publication. We have also seen this metric used in Becker's, which is another business health administration publication. The Case Mix Index. And the Case Mix Index takes a look at all of the affiliated hospitals and clinics associated with a medical center, in this case, an academic medical center, and incorporates a total sum of the cases that you see, and then kind of gives an evaluation of the differentiation of those cases. In other words, how unique those cases are. So this index is sort of an output based on that consideration and that formula. So we're placed second in the Chicagoland area in terms of diversity of cases in the Case Mix Index. So that gives you a very strong indication of the types of opportunities that you'll see in our training environment when you consider burn and trauma and psychiatric considerations and VA hospital care and again transplant organs. It's a very unique environment. So again, I think that's something to factor into your decision about where you train. So going back to the beginning here in terms of our mission. So again, one of the things that is going to be part of every medical school is the mission of that institution. And typically what you draw from the mission is kind of what they're expecting out of the training, what they expect when they make decisions about candidates, what they're looking for. There's some subtle hints. There's some really overt clues in terms of what the expectation is for that particular committee. Okay, so our committee is really looking at medical professionals. We're looking at the idea of biomedical science being a part of your consideration. Again, having translational research and being an R01 institution helps drive that interest. But again, I think we're really focused on the human spirit and respecting human dignity and life. And so there tends to be an extension of that occurs outside of the patient care environment. And in particular, because we are a Jesuit institution, it really is founded in this pedagogical structure that was created by St. Ignatius, who is the founder of the Jesuit order, in that we engage. We engage directly with patients. We're careful about listening to them. We're careful about understanding the disparities of their life and the things that might have created the context of the care they need. We extend engagement to those on the margins of society and those in underserved communities. And again, there's a really high value placed on respecting the dignity of others. So that, in principle, is the foundation of our learning environment. So one of the things that makes it really interesting to consider, the idea of medicine is something that is very scientific, obviously, but in the realm of admissions, there tends to be a very qualitative consideration for the things that we see as essential to thriving in a learning environment. So it goes without saying, obviously, you need to be smart. You need to have scientific acumen. You need to understand basic science principles, chemistry, biology. But you also, in this particular environment, need to have other qualities that can inform the faculty, the educators on our campus, that we can help you thrive in this learning environment. And then when you're done, the continuation of that effort extends into your vocational career, right? So the idea is that we want certain things to stick. We want things that are not necessarily basic science related. I mean, obviously, all that will stick and will be kind of ingrained into you through the academic process. But through the qualitative engagement process, there are things that we feel are important to learn, right? So reflection is a thing that most people suggest they have. If I were to ask you right now to reflect on your current day, what was your day like? You could all come up with a summation of that. But in the Jesuit pedagogy, reflection is an actual thing. It's a tangible thing. It's an actual tool that can be used to solve problems, right? So if I were to ask you to reflect about your day today and you presented something that happened in your day that was a problem you had to solve, ultimately reflective practice or reflective frameworking would allow you to hone in on that particular problem and create an opportunity to think about the problem, to establish an understanding of what caused the problem or what elements of the problem were able to be addressed, and then to carry forward some conclusion, whether that's a tangible act, whether that's a tangible consideration of knowledge. So reflection is something at base that in our application process, we want to know that you possess so that we can take this frameworking that is embedded in our patient-centered medicine course and allow you to thrive and to grow and to collect all the tangible information you need to be able to use this tool as an intern or as a resident. Okay. So that's one thing that we essentially look for in our student population. There's another element within the structure of the Jesuit pedagogy that is growth, right? So growth is expressed as formation in the Jesuit order. And so we're constantly forming. That is one of the things that we do when we bring a class together. We're forming a class. We're forming a cohort. We're forming a cohesive unit of individuals who are going to be working together in small groups to solve problems, to prepare themselves for the bigger problems that medicine and working with patients will no doubt reveal moving forward. So within the structure of growth and formation, we always examine these elements carefully in the applicant. So personal formation is one of those things that we examine quite a bit. Now, the thing about personal formation is that it suggests that you're aware of all the qualities and attributes that you possess. And I would venture to guess that if I were to ask 5 of you to tell me the top 3 things that are really strong about you and the top 3 things that are really weak about you, you might be able to do that. Would you do it with 100% honesty? Would you do that without thinking I'm going to judge you? I mean, there's lots of things that might go into the layering of that response. So what is really important is that you know yourself, right? And, I think that is principally the thing that we want in terms of that unique quality, right? That the uniqueness of an individual is that they know who they are and they are not comparing themselves to others. They're not trying to establish for themselves what they see in other people. They're really focused on developing their skills and their attributes. In some cases, we want to get better at some of these things. And in some cases, we understand that we may really be good at some areas of working with other people or how we comport ourselves in a group or how we, express our emotions or maybe don't, right? In some cases, that's a strength. In some cases, that's a weakness. But when we put ourselves in a room with others and we allow the learning process to engage, are we fully ourselves or are we trying to be somebody else? I would say that being yourself and leaning into that is one way to drive formation. So these are the things that we look for in your application. We have a lot of elements of this placed in our secondary application. The primary application doesn't really give us a lot of room for this type of examination. One of my principal concerns about the AMCAS application is that it's very data-driven, and in some cases, a little bit too data-driven, because again, you think about numbers and you think about chasing numbers and you think about, well, am I good enough to get into this medical school? Many of you are probably not even thinking about the qualitative nature of the application. You're just thinking about the numbers. What's the average MCAT? What's the average GPA? What's the average science GPA? Am I close? I mean, if I'm close, then I must be good enough to get in, right? Don't fool yourself. That's not how it works. Okay. So when you think about opportunities to drive context into your application, which is the act of physically writing about yourself, about your experiences, about what you've learned, think about the fact that the reader is looking for elements of formation. These opportunities to understand who you are coming directly from you. Now, one of the Hail Marys in the application process is the letter of recommendation. It's very rare that I see a letter of recommendation that is condemning a candidate, but it happens. And I will say this, you may not know it. Okay. So, that's the thing, unfortunately, I've seen in my experience is a candidate will assume that everyone writing a letter for them is advocating for them. But you really need to understand the person that's writing the letter for you. You really should have some form of a relationship with them, not necessarily a personal relationship, but a relationship where they understand these qualities about you. Maybe not just in one setting or in one venue. If you're asking a faculty member to write a letter of recommendation for you and they've only seen you in a classroom, and again, think about what you are in a classroom. Are you fully yourself or are you trying to be something else, right? The best letters are going to come from the people that actually see you as you are and your total unique self, right? So a lot of advisors, often the committee letter process, they examine you fully, they interview you, they track you over time, they know your personal story. So those tend to be really strong advocates. So again, when you ask for a letter, ask in a manner that drives a conversation. I would like to have a conversation with you about writing my letter of recommendation. Can we meet for coffee? Can I share some insights with you about what I'm looking for in a medical school? Can I tell you some things about myself that you may not know because you see me in one lens or with one lens? Okay. So that's personal formation. And then there's the element of professional formation. So again, this is a vocation. It's not business school. It's not, IT. It's not, anything relative to AI. The vocation of medicine goes back, millennium, right? It's an ancient art perfected over time. And that act of joining the vocation back in the days before technology was really an apprenticeship type model. A physician was given great respect in their community. And if you wanted to be a physician, you simply invested time and energy to learn from those who did this, right? Teach one, learn one, or learn one, teach one, right? And ultimately that has perpetuated into what we have today. So professional formation cannot be dismissed. Those of you who submit applications with scant details about clinical experiences, who suggest that it's just your intelligence that's going to drive your motivation for medicine? Well, there are a lot of smart people who are not physicians because they recognize they don't have what it takes to do that work. And again, what it takes is a lot of things, right? So apprising yourself of a lot of those things by virtue of observation is one thing, but by virtue of actual implementation and action, that's quite different. It's quite different to assert yourself as being ready for something if you've just watched it on YouTube. No offense to the YouTube channel. But again, the practical experience of doing it actually develops the muscle memory, develops the habits, the mind functions in a different way when it's actually doing something. And then when you try to do that again, remember reflective practice. Perhaps it didn't go the way I wanted to the first time, but I'm going to change and adapt to make it work this time. Those are all things you have to see and you have to be able to tangibly understand. So this is why professional formation is another strong area of evaluation in our process. So when you take all those things and put them into one sort of consideration, it is the whole person, okay? So when we think about the whole person, there are lots of things that are going to kind of come from that, holistic process, holistic admissions, right? So when we refer to holistic admissions, it's not a bad thing. I think there are a lot of elements in current society that suggest that looking at something holistically is a negative, but I think it's always a real positive because it prevents you from making biased assumptions, and it actually assumes that, growth and potential are part of the equation, right? So we always kind of see what is to develop here. We start with one aspect of your existence, right? The double AMC application is saying the one aspect of your existence that we're going to really focus on starts in undergrad and ends today, right? The time you submit your application. But guess what? You're a whole person, right? And you were a whole person before undergrad. And a lot of things that happened before undergrad actually kind of made you the person you are today. So finding ways to build on this evidence of self and this evidence of understanding who you are, that's the likelihood of success that we have in our admissions process. But of course, I can't stay away from the numbers, right? Because remember what I said about chasing them. These are not numbers to chase. They're just averages. Don't freak out. But I think it's important to recognize medical school applications are challenging because of the competition. It's typically about, 44 to 45% success rate for candidates who apply to medical school, getting into medical school. Right. And that's just the allopathic realm. I don't have the statistics for the osteopathic, but I would suggest they're probably similar. Right. And again, what is the measurement of this success? Well, in many cases, it's a measurement of your academic process, how well you've done over time, and how much you've investigated the vocation of medicine through research, through service, through clinical activities, and through activities that are adjacent to clinical activities. Because sometimes, getting a clinical activity is difficult. You want to do something, so you do something that's adjacent to medicine, right? And again, all of those experiences are important. And you have an opportunity to elucidate 15 experiences in your application to help any committee understand all of those different details that I've just described. So now medical school, really kind of going into this, again, very competitive for a reason, because it's really hard. It's really challenging. It's going to challenge you like you've never been challenged before. All of you have probably been the smartest person in your classrooms since you can remember. That's just not the case in medical school. I hear that all the time. I hear it from our faculty. Our faculty look at applications and they say to themselves, there's no way I'd be getting into medical school if I were an applicant these days. Not to daunt you, But again, I think that's just sort of the elevation of excellence in terms of academic output, right? Many students drive themselves to take on an enormous number of credits. Many students tend to focus on excellence by virtue of honors tracks and accelerated programs. Many of you in the community college realm may be ramping up to a 4-year degree by taking on quite a few community college credits. Give yourself a really strong base to go into that 4-year or 2-year program and excel. Those are the things that you're up against. And so in our policy, we're fully aware that all of you have been chasing these elements of academic success your entire life. Medical school is going to bring that out of you regardless. So why double down on that, right? Why make the grading in medical school another challenge to try to overcome? So in many cases, in many programs, and I've been doing this 20 years, it wasn't that way when I started working in medical school admissions, but it is now. A lot of programs like ours are going to pass fail. And it's good in some ways because, especially in the first 2 years, pass fail gives you the opportunity to really, dive into the knowledge and take chances and risk at learning things, and then finding that, you might need help to further understand these things, right? In the previous academic environments that you've been in, it may have been the case that your drive was to solely excel beyond others. But in medical school, there's so much knowledge to gain and so much to learn that you have to really focus on building the capacity for you to be able to do that, to be able to learn all the things you're going to be learning, not just in medical school, but for your entire career. Building the capacity, the sustainable interest and drive to learn something new every day, to literally have your mind blown every day. Oh, this is something I didn't know before. Okay. And you can do that if you take the sort of, those things off that have brought you to this point, right? If you can alleviate the burden of self-importance and success and be fully immersed in a learning environment, to be there to learn from others, from faculty, from patients, then you'd be surprised how much you will learn, you will absorb. And if you put your mind in that framework, then you'll have success in medical school. So, again, we went pass fail. I think it was 2017. I'd been at Stritch for 2 years. And since that time, it's definitely promoted more collaboration among students. They have great joy in being around each other. I can tell you when I was at University of Chicago and we didn't have a pass fail model, it was pretty cutthroat. I mean, I didn't see students really hanging out with each other. As a matter of fact, they didn't really have a place to hang out. It was more of a thing where, kind of like law school, you're just like, you're burying yourself in books and you're bearing down and you're really, trying to make the most of your considerations. And, I think that at some point that is going to kick in. At some point you have to be fully independent and a little bit selfish about your academic path. Obviously, when you study for the step exams, like there's no real group way of doing that. There's no real buddy system to that process. You're really going to have to bear down and take that on your own. Okay. But in the basic science years, in the first 1.5 years, while you have the opportunity to be around excellence, students who are as smart, if not smarter than you, who are coming from different backgrounds, who are coming from different perspectives, absorb all of that, learn from it, and that's going to build capacity for you to move forward. Okay. So the lectures are asynchronous. So to one sort of consideration of what I've just said, like if you just give yourself the opportunity to be at home, to log in and to look at a lecture and then think to yourself, that didn't make any sense. Let me watch it again. In real time, you really can't do that. In real time, in the olden days, you're like scribing through the lecture notes during the lecture. You might get asked a question and be thrown off base. Now you're dealing with that, and now you're not really focused on the learning environment anymore. So again, there's lots of real opportunities and just being able to watch a lecture. I know some students speed up the lectures or like listening to chipmunks. Um, I don't understand how their brain can absorb those things, but again, you can watch the lectures as many times as you want. It's the small group that you come to 3 or 4 times a week where you actually engage with your classmates. So small group, we have 170 students in the entire medical school in each class. Okay. But 17 small groups in the first year class, which means that each of the small groups is 10 students and a facilitator. So if you take in the lecture, the next day you're going to come to small group and now you're going to engage with your peers about what you learn. Okay. So in the image you see here, this is one of our PCM, our patient-centered medicine courses, where it's actually doubling up because in some cases, when you're not working with the mannequins, you're going to be working with each other, and you need to practice. So there will be like 20 students in a small group in the doctoring course, 10 students in a small group in the basic science course. Again, that engenders the idea that now when you're dialoguing about what you've learned, yeah, there's more accountability because there's fewer students in the room. There's more opportunity to learn from each other. There's more opportunity to dive in and really express an understanding of what you're learning because you're not, going to sink in a small group. You're going to be actively engaged. Okay. So the structure of medical school, again, as I said, very challenging, and it tends to be, you've heard the analogies about the fire hydrant. We try to gradually ramp up the first year. It doesn't really look like that when you look at it on this screen. But if you're thinking about it from the construct of basic science is one tier, so, you got to hit the basic science hard. Molecular and cell biology and genetics, that's the first course. So hint, hint, if you've taken molecular and cell biology and genetics, you're going to be ready for molecular cell biology and genetics in medical school. It's the students who've not done that that struggle, or it's the students who may not have done that in a way that provided enough rigorous opportunity for them to understand the material. And being the first class, I can tell you this because I now have an analyst. 99% of the students who pass the first class pass the step exam. Okay. So that's a really good tip for everyone out there. If you go to medical school and you can't pass the first course, then you really have to think about how you're going to change your approach because the approach you have at the time is not working. And there's very little time to make amends for that. You have to really attack an adaptation to either adapt to the pace or to the rigor of the coursework. And, open up your mind, find different ways to do that. We've got small groups, we've got counselors, we've got advisors, we've got an academic center for excellence where they can tutor you, all those different resources. And it surprises me to no end every year to find out that a student who does not successfully pass the first course is not taking advantage of those resources, because it makes me think, did we make a mistake? Did we bring someone in that had this very false conception of what medical school was actually going to be, So again, the layering, there's a top tier basic science, then there's a secondary tier, which is adaptation and engagement with your learning environment, with the learning environment in medical school being the patient care environment. Remember, we've got two different hospital systems that we work within. A private pastoral care environment, which is, a Catholic hospital, Trinity Healthcare's flagship academic medical center. Trinity Healthcare is the largest Catholic care provider in the Midwest. I know you've got Kaiser in California, but Trinity is a large Catholic care provider. So we're their flagship medical center. and then we're right next to a VA hospital. So a government-funded VA hospital is very different from a private pastoral care environment. So you've got two different systems kind of working. You're going to figure out how you navigate them in that secondary tier in the first year. And guess what? That's something that is going to stay with you. That's something that's going to allow you to continue to develop an understanding of different systems and different environments, allow you to participate in VA care moving forward. Okay. The other element is doctoring. How do you doctor? How do you treat patients? How do you interview patients? How do you do a differential diagnosis, right? All the different clinical skills. So that's third tier. So that's really what's happening in the first year. There's three kind of tiers working together. And I know it doesn't sound like a ramp up, but when you think about like the academic output, the structure is really focused on the basic science realm. The other two are more guides, right? Guides of what to expect, right? This healthcare system itself, how does it manifest these problems in some cases for patients? How does it solve problems for patients? How are patients in a VA hospital environment affected by the trauma they suffered in some war overseas or some conflict at home? How does doctoring, in essence, work? I mean, the very basic concept of doctoring is you touch a patient. But again, thinking about a lot of fast tracks to how this is done, a lot of medical schools never have you touch a patient in the first year or two, right? And so there are reasons for that. There's safety measures involved, but ultimately you have to learn how to be a doctor in order to be a doctor. So ultimately, those are the things that are built into the first year. Topics in clinical medicine tend to be more bioethical considerations that are woven into your consideration of patient care, right? So end of life care and nutrition, language acquisition and concordance. These are all things that represent themselves in a clinical environment. So you have to be facile and understanding of these different elements as you move forward in your observations. Another thing that happens in the first year is preceptorship, because the idea is that, okay, you've got a lot going on here in the first year. You're not going to be going out and working on patients. Now, you can go into organizations and have some opportunity to do that. I'll explain that in a minute. But preceptorship is really that opportunity to study physicians and to be guided by them. One of the things that we do in our learning environment, remember we're a Jesuit school, is that we have you shadowing and observing and preceptoring with a chaplain. So a chaplain is someone who is fundamentally concerned with pastoral care. That is the element of care that suggests that we're here to listen. We're here to provide advice to your family about a critical nature of care that you might need. In some cases, end-of-life care involves chaplain affiliations and care. So this is fundamentally something that we want you to understand in the first year. And it's important because, this is what drives a lot of patients to a Catholic hospital, is the idea that care is complicated and that families sometimes don't agree on how those things should work. So building capacity for you to understand how to listen and how to dialogue and how to be there for others as a physician is very important. So there's a quality about our students that exist and carries through the 4 years and goes into that internship and residency year that does not exist for other trainees, because they never get those types of considerations in their training environment. Second year is really fundamentally tied into pedagogy, right? So pedagogy suggests that there's a learning environment and there's an outcome of expectation. So the outcome of expectation of the second year is that you pass the step one. So in order to prepare you for the step one, we have to prepare you not just with a lot of information, but we also have to prepare you with an understanding of how to recall information that you've learned. So this is an element called spaced repetition. You're learning a lot of things in the first year. You're learning them all within the structure of a healthy human. Okay. So when we go to year two, you're going to kind of relearn some of those things. Again, spaced repetition brings them back into the second year, but now it's going to be applied to a diseased human. Okay. So this is the learning process to engage you, to help you understand at anatomical structure and physiology in the first year, and then to, oh, wait, let's see what happened here. That anatomical structure has been compromised by bone cancer. That physiological structure has been compromised. Okay. How do we treat it? How do we care for that? So that's, again, a lot of information to learn. And so now the other element of the pedagogy that helps you kind of relate it into this concept map in your brain is called integration. Integrating these concepts together, you have an understanding of the healthy human. Now, when you're studying the disease manifestation of a human being, you're integrating your knowledge together. So now you can kind of see a disease process by virtue of examination of a healthy human or a human who assumes they're healthy, right? So again, this is kind of the driving force in medical school. This is why it's hard. This is why there's so much to learn. And the elements of this you're learning in a 2-year window so that you can then apply it in the final 2 years. And in the final 2 years, you're in the clinical realm. So I don't really see students a lot in year 3 or year 4. They're rotating in clerkships, which are 4 to 8 week visitations in affiliate hospitals or clinics, or even our hospital, our clinics, in the order that you see here in some cases, but in different orders in other cases. But all of these specialty areas are examined in the clerkship realm. Now, remember what I said about, the first 2 years, pass, fail, very kumbaya experience. You're all working together. We come into the step exam process with designated study time to prepare yourself for the exam. And I always ask students the question, like, what's your plan? Is it the fortress of solitude? Or are you going to because you're really not going to find anyone that wants to work with you in this realm. This is really your opportunity to dive in and to succeed, right? So in that third and fourth year, you're rotating, and you're rotating with maybe a couple of people from your class, or maybe 6 or 7 people from your class in another rotation. There will be other students from other medical schools and some of your affiliated rotations. You'll be able to see and compare their training at that point to your training. Again, there are lots of elements of the rotations that are important to recognize. For us, we have you do surgery, psych, and neurology at either Hines or our hospital. But the other sites you can differentiate. And again, differentiating your sites means that you can increase the case mix index. You can identify a site on the south side of Chicago, dive into pediatric care at La Revita Hospital, which is right near University of Chicago on the lake. Get your lake action there. Do 3 weeks there. Do 3 weeks at North Shore on the complete total opposite side of town. You're going to see presentations of patients that are affected by different elements, right? Different disparities. Lots of asthma-related incidents on the south side, right? Not as much of that on the north side. Other things present themselves. So again, that differentiation of care is important for you to integrate into your knowledge about patients and about patient care. The fourth year, 3 sub-Is. Most medical schools are not going to force you to do an emergency medicine rotation. I'm sure you've seen the pit. It's not for everyone, but guess what? Everyone's going to do one at Stritch. And I think there's something really important about that. I've talked to students who have no desire to do emergency medicine, even before or after they've done their rotation. But I've seen some students completely and fall in love with it because of the pace and because of all the things that they are being asked to do. You have to be able to do everything in an EM rotation, right? So the other 2 sub-Is, the ICU, and then in the wards is one where they just sort of plop you down into a specialty area and they say, okay, now you're going to be essentially doing everything we ask you to do. We're going to give you as much intense training as we can. This is the real preparation for your internship year after you match. Okay. And our students do very well in the match, and they do exceptionally well as interns. That's the goal. The goal is to make you the best intern possible so that you can become a chief resident, so that your career can start off at an accelerated rate. Okay. And I would say that if you had a choice to make about that when you started medical school, to have that be the outcome versus just being another doctor, you might probably choose the former. And I think most students would. You also have the step 2 in your 4th year. There's protected time for that, but as you'll find, once you go through clerkship rotations and sub-Is, the step 2 is, I wouldn't say it's a breeze, but it's definitely not the same as the step 1. Okay. Again, real quick, academic medical centers provide a lot of disciplinary structure and integration of disciplines. So we have business applications. You can do a dual degree in business administration, public health, bioethics, global health. Our students engage well with each other. They engage within structured organizations on campus. Those organizations provide them the opportunity to engage with free clinics, particularly in the first 2 years. And that's a really important thing, because when you're in the first 2 years and you're, training in PCM and being preceptor, you're not really getting a lot of opportunity to, take charge or be there working directly with patients. You have to be supervised in the wards. So when you're in a free clinic, and let's say you have experience as an EMT, or you have experience as a phlebotomist, or you have experience as a medical assistant, now you can really dive into those experiences, those licensures you have, those certifications you have, and really do a lot of that work. So that's one of the things that really drives student interest, is going into those different organizational structures. Again, we're a Jesuit institution. So again, that engagement outside of our boundaries is really important to cultivate. And the Jesuit order has a history of being the missionary sect of the Catholic Church. You only need to think of St. Francis, the Pope, the previous Pope, who was a missionary in Argentina during the Pinochet, regime, which, if you know anything about history, was just a really horrible time for Argentinians. And Pope Francis was there as a missionary. And the work that missionaries do is not to try to change the elements around them, but to certainly provide assistance within the elements that exist. So being able to observe and be a part of different underserved communities and recognize the disparities that exist, and to try to be of help, to recognize that you can sustain a missionary effort over time by virtue of care, compassion, and skills, bringing skills to that environment. That's a very important quality to learn about. And again, when you learn something like that, it definitely stays with you, and it's a very formative experience. Research, as I mentioned, is very strong here. We have an R01 institution. We have a STAR program, which is a summer research program. That's 8 weeks, where we'll pay you after the first year to do research. So again, applying to medical school, there's nothing really surprising here. We have lots of information on the MSAR to help guide you, help you kind of recognize what the timelines are. The first bullet point, apply early. I can't stress it enough. That part of that being prepared is really, engaging in the opportunity to present your application in May for AMCAS to process it so that it can get to the medical schools by June. We start our interviews in August. So we're looking at applications as early as late June, early July, and we're building our momentum to bring people in. So if you're applying in September or October, there could be thousands of candidates ahead of you in that line. So really building a strong application is an important thing. We have a program called Aspire, which is a summer program. We help you build a better application. We provide you with housing. We provide you with a stipend. 1 month here in Chicago, where we'll teach you about building a better application, where we'll engage you in our public health protocols and work with our neighboring communities, so you can kind of see some of the things that our students do and engaging with others, engaging with populations around us. So that's a really good program. So if you're interested, there's some information there to reach out to. And again, I think one of the things that many of you have as questions perhaps are these, again, how do you stand out? Again, the story is important because it should be about you. It should be factual. It should express your formative experiences. It should express the things that have guided you. But I would say that, many of the things that are seen on this screen tend to be sort of the hidden questions when you apply, or to sort of suggest whether you're ready to apply or not. Um, and so I like to leave these questions on the screen just to see if anyone has a desire for me to lean into any element that they see here. So I'll stop talking because I've been talking a lot. See if you have any questions. I see some questions in the Q&A, so let me go here. Let's see. Yes,
We'll
Portillo's is a
ask you.
very
We'll ask you so you don't have to. We could shorten it a little bit.
okay. Okay. Yeah, no, someone had mentioned Portillo's. Yes, definitely order Portillo's. Um, but I mean, if there are any questions relative to this, I don't have a whole lot more. I do want to kind of lean into some of these questions because I feel like they're going to be important to answer.
Yeah, I think one of the questions they're asking is somebody wanted to know the effects of chaplain that you have seen in Strick's graduates.
Well, some students are drawn to us because we're a Catholic institution. So one of the things we have is we have a bioethics degree program, and there are some co-curricular options within bioethics, and one of them is called Physician's Vocation, which is like a spiritual formation curriculum. So students who are drawn to us because of their faith and who engage in this chaplain oriented care, a couple of things could happen. They could be driven to this physician's vocation program, which is kind of an honors track, and it stays with them for 4 years. So they're concurrently learning elements of spiritual formation as they're developing their skills in medicine. Another aspect of it is that they can actually be trained to become chaplains. So we actually train students to be chaplains. Um, there's also Eucharistic activities that occur on campus. So we have an active ministry on campus, which I think there's not very many, if any, medical schools that have a ministry department on campus. When I started working at Stritch, I didn't know that you could be a doctor and a priest. And I worked with two Jesuit physicians who were priests. And the thing that's really compelling about that is that my understanding and knowledge of Jesuit priests is that they give up all of their earthly possessions. Like they don't own anything. They're instructed by their order to go to different places and to serve. So I'm thinking a doctor, like a lot of people I know go to be a doctor so they can have stuff, right? So they can buy lots of stuff at some point. So I kind of looked at it as like this real contradiction, right? A doctor who has nothing, but they're amazing people, and they're just literally put on earth to serve, right? So when you're engaged with people like that, it does have an effect on you. I can't tell you exactly in 170 different cases for every class how that manifests itself, but I can definitely tell you it does. And I can certainly tell you that in some cases, students will do missions and they will continue to do them even as attending physicians. We have a lot of alum come back and say they were inspired by their time at Stritch to do this, and they form foundations and Catholic charity organizations to continue to do that work. So I think there's a lot of things that are kind of personalized within the structure of that learning environment. But again, it's not for everyone. We have students who are coming from very different faiths. Again, I think, students who come to us from Muslim faith see and identify a lot of the qualities in this learning environment and engage and really enjoy being a part of that. Students from Jewish backgrounds as well. we have some students who are agnostic in our medical school. Again, sometimes I wonder, like, what is their experience like? But I think, again, in a learning environment, it's really hard to establish what everyone is gaining contextually, but I think, again, if you bring these elements into the environment, eventually students will gravitate to it. It may not be every student, but it'll certainly be some.
Thank you for sharing. Another person, the same person who asked about the Portillo's question, they said, what about Loyola being a Jesuit program makes the institution stand out from others and focusing on focusing on the patient holistically?
Well, again, in pastoral care environments, there tends to be an element of understanding the patient's situation. So one of the things that I recognize is that our physicians take time to actually engage with the patient, to talk with them. I think in many cases, there's a running clock on a visitation with a patient. Sometimes the standard is 15 minutes. But I recognize that our physicians will spend more time with patients. They will provide their personal contact information to patients. They will, I've had, patients call the admissions office because, again, they're thinking hospital admissions, when they have, things going on with them and they're looking specifically for a physician, because they recognize that person has helped them. And in some cases, that help has not just been clinical, it's been, emotional. It's helped them understand and recognize different resources that they may be able to obtain or need help with. I think that's just sort of like an extension of the role. The clinician is there to, address your physical concerns, but the additional extension of engagement allows that person, if fully engaged, to be present and to learn more about the patient. We do something called First Patient for every incoming class. Dr. Mickelfelder, who is a program director for our medicine program, he interviews a patient, every first patient. And, the patient he interviews is usually someone that has come to this conclusion that, like, this is the best care they've ever received. And it's usually older patients, but they're really talking about, like, why. And in 90% of those cases, it's because of the fact that the physician really invested their time and energy in getting to know that patient and following up with that patient and being present with that patient. And I don't know if you've had an experience like that, what it feels like. Unfortunately, if you haven't had an experience like that, then that's the predominance of what you see in medical care these days because of the running clock. So that's the thing. It's this element of slowing down and really being present with the patient.
Another question I see is regarding the MCAT, and it's, does taking the MCAT a number of times look bad?
That's a loaded question because, I can look at it from two different perspectives, but it really doesn't matter how I look at it because, a committee is assessing every candidate. And there are some committee members that would say, if this candidate has taken the MCAT 6 times, I'm going to template that experience of a standardized test to the experience of preparation for a standardized test in medical school. In other words, if it took them 6 times to study and pass the MCAT or to suggest that they were ready to submit their application with the MCAT, will that happen on the STEP exam? You don't have 6 attempts on the STEP exam, by the way. You have 3 in our student policy. I think technically you have 4, but you can't pass into your clinicals until you pass the step exam. So for some people, that's how they see it. There are others that will look at the differentiation of the test, and they'll say to themselves, did the trend go up or did the trend go down? If the trend went up, then that gives them evidence to support that the student has resiliency and can improve over time. And isn't that a good thing, right? It is a good thing. But again, thinking about medical school and thinking about time, the factor of time, that same person may look at that same progression and say, oh, this happened over a 5-year period. They're not going to have that much time in medical school to improve. Now, if they're looking at that same progression and that progression is in a 2-year window or a 1.5-year window, now they might be excited again because that student has adapted more quickly and changed their methods. One of the things I might do in my interview with a student in that particular situation is to directly ask them, what did you do between the first exam and the third exam that led to your success? What did you change, right? I'm looking for a really tangible answer that I can incorporate into that report because I know on our committee, someone's going to be looking for that answer. If the answer is, I didn't do anything, I got more sleep, that's not going to be a big help for them. If the answer is, I went from Khan Academy to a private tutor, or I went from a private tutor to group study, or I took, extension courses, or I finished my basic science progression in my major, and now I have more knowledge. Okay, so those are the things that, the committee member might want to see. So it's really hard to say, but what I would recommend is, look at the MSAR. Every medical school is explicitly stating kind of their policies with these things. I can tell you the policy that we have for our MCAT is that we're focused on 2 things, your chemistry and your biology. All right, your chem phys and your bio. And we're thinking at a 125 and up, you can pretty much handle anything in our curriculum. Okay. But if you're not at a 125 in chem phys, or you're not at a 125 in bio, and I'm not talking about cars, I've completely persuaded my committee to understand that cars is an outlier they cannot depend on. Okay. Language has not been fully explored in this process of the AMCAS application, nor has it been given its proper merit. So the cars is just throw it away, at least in my opinion. Now, other medical schools may think differently. Psychosocial, a lot of downstream effects for psychosocial. In other words, once you get beyond basic science, now psychosocial has a little bit more, stick-to-itiveness to it, right? But for the most part, the committee is looking at who can pass the first 2 years. So that's where our focus is, right? Chem phys and bio.
And the only thing that I would just add is every medical school will see every single of your MCAT scores. So
That is true.
just make sure you do that. And I think some people want to retake it because, it's like, I want to do better. Everybody wants to do better. But at certain point, you got to make sure you're not going to do worse because that's going to be a lot worse for you. And the other part of it too is taking into consideration the economics both of time and money to study for this exam, pay for it, maybe getting a prep course, practice exams. So there's, and you're taking time away from other things you can do. And so, every school posts their MCAT range and averages. So just, look at that. But also I've just talking to a lot of people take the MCAT as kind of like doing an assignment to just do it and hoping for the best, which that's like really not a good way to do it. Like you
Right.
gotta,
Yeah, nor is it a good idea to do it just to see how you'll do as a
Right.
benchmark. That's not a successful, typically not a successful outcome. And the other thing I would say, not to interrupt your train of thought, but because I get asked this question a lot, like, how many practice exams should I take? You're gonna probably fall out of your chair when I tell you, I think 10, doing 10, because if you do 10 practice exams, the way that the test is designed, you have literally been able to see every iteration of how those questions can be asked and presented. So you won't be surprised by the length of the test. You won't be surprised by the questions that you see. You won't be surprised by anything. You'll have literally done the 10,000 hours of work, right? You've all read Outliers. 10,000 hours make you an expert, right? So 10 exams, 10 practice exams practically makes you an expert at the MCAT. And really, it's that plus the momentum of your own knowledge that will carry you. So,
Yeah. We've done about 30 hours worth of MCAT things people could go take a look at. And then the bottom line is that this is another one people always come up and say, should I take me 3 months or 6 months? And the bigger question is somebody may be able to learn something in an hour, and it may take you 40 minutes or it may take you 2 hours. So you have to adjust that as well. For everybody's going to be very different. And I think in the book of Luke, it says, physician, heal thyself. But if you look into the original, it's know thyself. And you got to know yourself and how you study and what time is required. So don't live somebody else's
right.
metrics of saying, well, Marco is a lot smarter and handsomer than me, so he's going to be able to do it much faster and better. So you're just going to have to work harder, or the other way around. So
Yeah, and I think to that point, because, studying and dedicated for the step exam, that's a solitary act, and you have to be prepared to address that. And I think if you go through the process with the MCAT, when you get to that point where you're studying for the step exam, you already have a process that works, and you just kind of lean into it and enhance it. Those are good questions.
And to follow up on the question, kind of similar to comparison, this person's asking what advice do you give in straying away from comparison throughout the process? I'm assuming they're talking about like during applying to medical school.
Yeah, no, that's tough. That's tough for your generation. I think your generation is under assault by this comparison dilemma. Um, Social media, has really had an effect on this sort of part of your brain. Um, I see students now more than ever relying on each other to support their wellness and their academic strengths and considerations. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's definitely medicine as a collaborative art, but as I've said, some of these things you have to do in isolation. Like when you take an exam, it's a computer-based test. Like it's you and a computer, right? So you're going to have to find those things that you can lean into that you know you have and possess within you. And again, a lot of it does take, practice in terms of figuring out what those things are. There is a real quality about pushing your comfort zone. There's a real asset that you build when you do something that maybe other students haven't done, or that you put yourself into an experience where people are like, "Are you nuts? What are you doing that for? That's so hard." Or, "Man, I wouldn't want to work with those kinds of people. What are you doing?" Right? I mean, some of those experiences, which are completely perhaps oppositional to the foundations that you've built for yourself over time, like those put you into a situation of having to adapt, of having to, fundamentally, you know, move your own personal barometer. And I think if you have done that enough times, some students do that through study abroad, not tourism abroad. Okay. Very different thing to pay someone for an experience they cultivate for you and curate for you, as opposed to a mission, right? If you go on a mission, they're going to say, okay, this is where we're going. These are the disparities of care that exist. This is the language consideration you might have to know about. These are the things that you need to stay away from and be aware of. Now let's go, right? So again, you're kind of left at your own devices, your wits, your skills, your strengths, and finding some new ones, right, is always a great thing to discover about yourself. It's hard to discover these things in medical school because it's just so hard and overwhelming, right? You're all building amazing resilience in medical school, but not a single person recognizes it because it's so hard. I mean, that's the idea, right? To recognize that you have the capacity to build these things into who you are. And so, one of the other things I would say, and I know, not obviously not everyone's an athlete, but I see this in athletes a lot, right? They've participated in a sport, they break their leg, they have an ACL tear, everything, completely falls apart for them, and they have to try to come back. Not like a Lindsey Vonn type thing, but, something where they push themselves, right, to a limit that has an outcome that either surprises them or satisfies them in terms of the fact that they know that they can do that, right? They have the mental fitness to be able to do these things. So I would say that that's something that a lot of young people have to really force to happen because, in many cases, the way that young people have grown up, and I have a 22-year-old, so there were times when I would, like push him to do something that he didn't want to do because I knew at some point he was going to learn something. And even though he didn't want to do it, I knew he was going to learn something, right? But I mean, you're all adults, right? You got to do that for yourself. And I think sometimes doing that in preparation for medical school, not only does it give you that extra attribute or does it give you that additional confidence, it gives you a great story to tell. It gives you a great story to pass on to others because when you share that story about pushing your limits or extending your comfort zone, the person who is going to be assessing you for medical school is thinking to themselves, oh, they're ready for medical school because that's exactly what's going to happen, right? I've seen pristine candidates, 4.0, 525, never affected by life at all, never pushed in any way, shape, or form. Two parents are physicians. A lot of them struggle mightily in medical school. And you would think to yourself, how has that happened? Right? Because they never built the mental fitness. It all came really easily for them, you know? So, I mean, I think that's the thing to always remember. The more adverse path that you've had, the more resilience you've built up. Now, whether or not you can express that, whether or not you can demonstrate that, I mean, that's kind of up to you to really think about how you can formulate a plan to put that into some actionable sort of understanding of who you are. And again, that's what makes you unique. That's the thing that helps build that capacity for success. And I would say that's the thing that a lot of medical schools are looking for. And if there was a way that they could create a test, the situational judgment test doesn't really do that. That's why we don't really participate with the SJT. I mean, it's a manufactured, set of conditions, right? But you can't really, I mean, you can't, it's hard for me to challenge any experience an individual has had when they sit down and talk to me about true adversity, right? There's nothing I can say to diminish that at all, right? It's something that they own. It's something that makes them who they are. It's part of the structure of the lattice of their being, right? So those are the things you have to really think about. Think about building that kind of capacity for yourself going into this very competitive process because I've been talking about medical school being, kumbaya and everything, but it's residency that you're preparing for, and that's the cutthroat. That's where all the knives come out. All right. So we're trying to get you ready for that too. And that's the thing you have to also be thinking about.
I see another question asking about if you could please talk about gap years and maybe discuss the pros and cons when applying to medical school.
Well, the first thing I would do is to change the nomenclature entirely. I like to use glide year. When I think about a glide year, what does that insinuate? In my mind, it means I'm gliding soundly and safely into that application cycle, meaning that I know exactly what I'm doing. If I'm gliding, I'm turning off the engine and I'm just letting the air take me to my landing point. A glide year is a great euphemism for someone that has prepared to do this, effectively made a decision. I'm giving myself this year, I'm giving myself this 2 years to do something that will enhance my ability to do what I know is necessary in medical school. Okay, glide year. Another thing you could call it is a growth year. Perhaps there is something you know is missing in your application. Is it an academic piece? Is it a clinical piece? Is it a service-oriented piece? Is it a financial piece? Whatever that piece is, the opportunity for a growth year is to build it into your capacity for success. Okay? So when you say gap year, it's just sort of a negative kind of connotation, right? It's like, there's this hole in my application. Did you fill it? I mean, that's the first question I ask. Someone says I did a gap year. I was like, well, what are you filling? What are you filling into that gap? And did it work? Do you need more time? Okay. So what I would say is that, when it comes to your academic progress, the courses you've taken, basic science, the proximity of those courses at their most extreme to medical school positions you to be most prepared for that first course, molecular cell biology and genetics. And remember what I said, what's going to help you navigate molecular cell biology and genetics? Taking molecular cell biology and genetics in undergrad or in some other capacity before you get to medical school. And if you've never taken those courses, potentially there's a gap, right? So the other thing is to, again, think about the time between that progression and starting medical school. If it's 5 years, if it's 4 years, it's going to feel like a bit of a transition to go into a learning environment, especially if you've been working or doing other things where you haven't been applying that type of effort academically. To switch that on again is going to take some real effort. So that's another thing to sort of consider in this timing between the start of medical school and the end of your basic science curriculum. Some candidates will do this. They'll say, okay, I'm going to do a public health program, or I'm going to do a business administration program, and then I'm going to apply to medical school. Our committee sees that, and they're not making the same correlation between business acumen or even public health acumen and basic science. They still see that as a delay. They still see that as an interruption and what could be progress made connecting your basic science core to the start of your program. Not in all cases, but there are enough instances of that I've heard that make me think that, well, the best timing would be really to think about a year or two after you've had your most structured basic science courses to really start making that plan to get into the medical school environment. And now some students are doing it, they're thinking about that even more in undergrad. And so in some cases they're thinking, okay, my junior year is when I'm going to make this decision to go. I'm going to do a 2-year track from junior year into medical school. So obviously I've got a growth year, I've got a glide year, I can make that plan. Okay, so that's sound to me. That's sound, principled, structured guidance going on there. But it's already been mentioned here, the financial considerations for that. Is that something that you have to factor in? Some people are not quite ready for the expense of medical school. They have to work to earn the money, right? Some people have to convince their parents, that this is the right path for them. and not the path that they want, right? So there's lots of things that are going on. So, I really wouldn't be too caught up in the distance or what you're doing. I think what you're doing is you're going to figure out what to do. But in terms of like whether it's gliding into that seat or growing into that seat, really think of it in that way. And I think if you apply that mentality to whatever it is that you're doing, it'll make a lot more sense and probably have a more positive effect on your application.
Thank you. Another question we have in the chat. This person's asking, if I convert to Catholicism and become a priest, can I put that in my application? And would it help me get in?
Uh, I would say it's going to take you longer to you have a better chance of getting into medical school than being a priest
Yeah.
because that takes 6 to 9 years. I have a friend who's a priest, and it takes you, it's about they say it's average 7 years. It took him 6 years, but I also, I call him, super priest, but it took him 6 years, but yeah,
Yeah.
you have a better chance of getting into medical school than being a priest.
Well, in the Jesuit order, there is a pathway to become a priest, but you can't become a priest until you become a brother. So we've had brothers apply and gain acceptance. And a brother is like someone that's essentially like 3 or 4 years into their divinity path. Um, it's not for everyone. We actually are holding a candidate in our class who has a priest background. I mean, I would say, it's certainly something we always identify a candidate in the pool that has this experience. We're definitely interested in the sort of why of medicine. I wouldn't say it's something you should do just to get into medical school, as Chauvin has referred to, but if it's something that's really a fundamental part of who you are and what you are and what you represent, and it's a passion that you have, then absolutely go for it. And, if medicine is something that's equally as compelling, then, it's definitely something you should do. But what I would tell you about the two physicians who were, Jesuit priest, one of them, he earned his MD first and then became a priest. And then the other did it the opposite way. And I never really asked them, independently, like why they chose to do it the way that they did. But obviously it's life and it's experience, right? And it's just sort of like there is a real calling at work. It's not just sort of a box they checked or a decision they made because they thought it would be interesting. I mean, it's a calling, it's and God is instrumentally involved in that calling. So I mean, I think that's more the thing that I would see as compelling that decision.
Thank you. Another question I see is how often do you accept students with a redemption story that started off poorly and shown a growth curve in every area, as well as if there's any screening out stats as well, such as like GPA cutoffs, MCAT cutoffs?
Well, really the only screen outs I can share are the MCAT cutoffs there at 125 for Chem Phys, 125 for Bio. I mean, very rarely am I able now to claim this redemption story as significant enough to mitigate or ignore a low score in those areas. It has happened though. And I would say, a redemption story is something that I kind of see as a personal story that has changed your perception of who you are and built the momentum and the structure for you to be a different person moving forward. Like, and who that person is fundamentally what we're exploring, right? So there are lots of circumstances that make us who we are. I'm always trying to compel the committee to not think so much about the circumstances, but to think about the person standing in front of them in the interview or potentially coming to committee for consideration, like who are they now, And again, like there's this instance where we just recently had a candidate who's a reapplicant and expressed this very adverse path to medicine and had a mistake that they made in a lab environment and they were highly criticized for this mistake. And the iteration of time that they had in the lab was so insignificant that we just didn't feel it was fair to declare that this person was not capable because of this very insignificant perspective that had been presented in their case. Again, part of my assertion in this case was this person deceived them. They deceived them by telling them, I'll advocate for you, but then they threw them under the bus, right? What I would suggest in that person's case, as I would suggest to all of you, is just to be thoughtful and mindful of who is advocating for you and to really share your story with them. There are lots of things you can learn by sharing your story with your advocates. They're either going to tell you, wow, that's an amazing story. If I were on a committee, I would absolutely 100% admit you. Or there's no way I would ever talk about that. Okay. So this is, I think, important because in some cases, I've recognized committee members who are more averse to the redemption story because they feel like the story is the story. It's not the compelling nature of the application that the candidate's trying to assert. So don't get lost in the story. Build the story into your capacity to move forward successfully. And again, if you have the salient elements in the story of resiliency and perseverance and grit and intelligence, emotional intelligence, right? Then you build that lattice more succinctly in terms of what the committee is thinking of. Again, on a holistic perspective that's driven by mission, they're really looking for qualities, and many of those qualities are not just going to be determined by a number, but they'll be determined by the context of what they recognize in your application. So that's really kind of what you're building when you're kind of driving the story or driving the understanding of your why in the application.
Another question, going like back to like the dual degrees that you had mentioned during the presentation. Is it possible for medical students who matriculated into Stritch School of Medicine already to apply for these dual degrees after they've been accepted instead of like beforehand?
Well, yeah, there's two typical pathways. You can apply a combined degree MD, or you can just apply MD only. In some cases, we have an M0 option for some of these programs where if you are a combined degree candidate in AMCAS, you kind of get first dibs on what we call an M0 option, which is to say that you could defer your entry into the medical school and focus on the dual degree first. We do that in our bioethics. We do that in our public health program. But the more common path is for students to apply MD only and then to, focus on the first 2 years and then take the step exam. And then before you go into clinicals to disembark and use that time to focus on the dual degree. In that manner, it has a real connection to your academic foundation in medical school. And it also potentially has the opportunity to inform your clinical capacity with the knowledge you gain. So that's the more typical route. Again, I think the barrier there is that you're moving away from your cohort. People you came into the program with have moved on, and you come back in the program, and now who are all these people I'm seeing in my PCM class and whatnot. It can be a minor thing, but I think cohort models tend to demonstrate greater success because of the element of support that students give to one another. So those are factors to think about.
Another question I see is about the ideal age range that you are looking for in applicants, if you guys are looking for an age range, and if much older students are less likely to get in.
Well, I mean, it's hard to say. I would say that, again, thinking about experience and students who have been older, I mean, the majority of students who are older have families, have other considerations that they've built into their capacity, and so it's often some of those things that become more the challenge than just age. So again, what I mean is, like, older students often have children, right? And children are a real challenge for students in medical school, especially if you're a single parent, especially if you're not around a support system to help you take care of your children. I've seen students delay because of that. I've seen students delay having children in medical school because of the time factor of focusing on family. So, I don't think it's just age necessarily that's a barrier. I think it's just all the things that are kind of part of being older, having older parents you have to take care of, having children. I mean, at some point, I remember I visited a campus, and a person came up to me. She was 63, and she had like two PhDs, and she was like, "Let me go to medical school." And I mean, I'm not judging anyone. I was really interested in hearing what she had to say about why, but when I brought that back to a colleague on the committee, I mean, the first thing that they said was, she's going to be 70 years old in residency. What is she going to be able to do? Right. And that's the clinician's perspective. That wasn't my perspective at all. Right. So, obviously, if you recognize what scut work is, if you recognize what the life of an intern is, having to step up and do whatever, whenever, and you think about doing that at 70, is there a reality to that perspective that this person has? So again, like, that's more to the point. I don't think that anyone should have barriers on age in any situation. They just have to fully understand and express the full extent of what they're, committing to based on their age and, their familial situations. I think that's one of the reasons why we do ask a lot of questions about support team. If someone is coming to Stritch from another state, they've never been in Chicago before, do they have family? Who are they going to go to if they struggle? I mean, obviously, we want to build a strong support system for them in medical school, but when your students don't live on campus and they live in, communities around Chicago, you want to, it's harder to be able to support them at all points in the process. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you for that. Another person in the chat is asking, do you have any advice for students who struggle to form relationships with professors for literary rec?
Uh, Well, I mean, you're going to have a basic science, perspective, someone that's taught you basic science. So, that's one element of a letter that can complete our process. I mean, again, you can do a committee letter, a committee packet, which often folds in different perspectives from different professors and different people who are part of an advising committee. But if you're in a situation where that doesn't exist on your campus, and you have to identify individuals to help you, then I think it's really important to, as I said, think about how much they know about you outside of that one iteration of experience, whether it's that one class you had with them or that one research lab you spent with them. Um, I think just trying to find someone that can dynamically understand your skills in a number of different ways. It does take time. But again, I think it's important to dialogue with anyone you're asking. If you have problems reaching out to professors, or if you feel like you don't have a good relationship with professors, I think that's again something to really think about in medical school, because you're really not going to be able to succeed in medical school unless you can form these types of relationships with faculty. I mean, they're the ones that are going to guide you to the specialty you want, to the different experiences that you may want. I mean, no one does it alone. No one can do it alone. You're going to need that support. I mean, you're going to be forced to have an advisor, a specialty advisor. A lot of medical students going into the third year have no idea what they want to specialize in, and they have to make the decision in a year and about a year at that point. So are they going to trust their own kind of research and devices, knowing that they're rotating through, clerkships and, in some cases they've got the emergency medicine rotation, which is 24/7. I mean, again, 11 shifts, but those 11 shifts can occur from 3 to 8, right? Or from, whenever. Are you going to have the time to really invest in sort of figuring that out? Or are you going to lean on the people that teach you, the people that you rely on to teach you in that environment, who might be doing something that you want to do? You really have to find a way to engage. Engagement is a very important fundamental part of medical school, and certainly our medical school. I'm not saying that every medical school is going to have a high standard on engagement. You can definitely go to a medical school and hide and succeed. I mean, I know students that have done it. I'm not gonna lie. I know students that have done it, but I also know there's probably one person, at least one person that they've leaned on to get out of that place to succeed. And they may be very cautious about who that person is. They may take their time in finding out who that person is, but ultimately they're going to find one. And so you got to keep that opportunity open for yourself.
And you guys, like, you have to understand, like, if you're going to a big university, you have a professor that lectures any of your core classes. You're looking at about 4 hours a week times, if you're in a semester system, times, 12 or 13 weeks. That's why office hours are important, engaging with them. That requires time and effort from you. The other part of it too, if you're at a big university, if you're at a community college, you're spending like 12 hours a week with your bio professor and or organic chemistry professor, and I joke with them that I see them more than my significant others, or people that I love. And so, but if 12 to 15 hours, but if you are in a big university, then you have TAs that are grad students that have office hours, that do discussions, that do labs. So and the reason they ask you for this is if you're reaching out to these people and using your resources, and what the neighbor said is like help you along the way, because and if you're struggling in that class, that's you're talking to them, you build that relationship with them to say, hey, I'm struggling with this concept, or hey, this is how I've studied. And if they want to, people go into academics, either academic medicine or academic teaching, is they're willing to get paid a little bit less, but they do like teaching, they do like research, they do like being around students, because if they didn't, they could go work in industry, and make 3 times more and not have to deal with, post puberty, students around them. So, you know, there's, and this is just the general statement I'm going to make is people that are in Dean Neighbor's position as Loyola and at 150 other schools, they're pretty smart and they've devised this system. It's not perfect. It has flaws and challenges, but they have a reason they have these things that has been developed over time and not, it wasn't, thought about, 20 seconds and then, okay, we're going to make everybody do this because because they want to, but this is a thought behind it, a reason behind it. I don't know if that's correct or not, but
Yeah, pedagogy drives it all. And I would say that every medical school can train you to be a physician, but the particular quality you should be looking for is, can you thrive in that learning environment? And what additional things can you obtain in that learning environment that will help you succeed in your chosen vocation, I think that's just kind of the way to approach any educational experience.
Thank you. One question is asking regarding patient care experience. Is it good to have patient care experiences? And if I don't currently have any, would it affect my chances to not get accepted?
Well, as I mentioned, with respect to professional formation, it is a question as to how you're determining your own fitness for that particular environment of care. If you've not tangibly applied yourself in that realm, I've had many candidates tell me that they have shadowed like 50 different people and that they've seen this and they've seen that. And when I ask them to really help me understand what skills they have actually learned and utilized from that observation, I don't really get a lot of context to that. And I think that's more about the competitiveness of the pool than anything else, because if we're making 170 decisions about who to bring in, and we have, candidates who have done things with patients, whether they've been a patient greeter, a transporter, or a medical assistant, or an EMT, or whatever the case may be, or they've watched people take care of patients, who are we going to go with? Who are we more certain has evidenced for themselves that when they get to their third year, they're not going to completely crumble, right? Because remember, you're not getting a lot of that intense clinical activity in the first year or two. But in that third year, and this is the thing that I've been told in my role in admissions, at some point they'll let me know, hey, you brought this candidate in and they didn't have much clinical experience and they're really struggling in their clerkships. And the thing about the clerkship is, it's kind of like a little bit of internship. I mean, the thing that makes clerkship really hard for the clerkship directors is when the clerks can't do anything and you're in the way. And you don't want to be the person who can't do anything, who's in the way in any clinical rotation, because you're graded. That's the other thing I didn't tell you is, in the clinical realm, it's more than just pass fail. It's high pass, low pass. It's honors. There are standards that you can exceed in the clinical realm. And if you're completely caught off guard and surprised in every iteration of your clinical experience, you can salvage yourself with the shelf exam, but that clinical observation is maybe not going to be something that sets you up for a good match. So that's more or less the idea, right? What kind of match do you expect if you have not really, adapted to understanding that realm, right? And so, you have to think about what is it that you can do to get some element of that kind of care so that you're ready to anticipate what to expect when you get to that third year. Because again, OSCEs and standardized patients that you see in the second year, those are good training environments for you to learn about patient care, but they're not real patients. They're standardized patients. So, and nothing can replace the skill you learn. If you're licensed or certified in any kind of clinical skill, no one can doubt the veracity of your claim that you are prepared. So having that is another quality that is in a competitive environment, a very, very solid thing to have as an asset in your application.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I work as a tech, and I could tell you that it's all fun and games until you show up to clinic and the patient is ill and they bleed on you or vomit on you or not compliant, or that it's very nerve-wracking. And so getting that experience and no, and then the other part of it too, it's kind of like saying, I want to be on the Olympic hockey team, but I can't skate, and I've never even like watched a hockey game or even played one. And then we want to give you, and you're taking over patients that are real, and that's the priority at the end of the day. Like you can't harm patients. So
Another
um,
question. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to be mindful of the neighbor's time. So we've got whenever you want to end, just let us know because I'm sure we keep you here till 10
Well,
o'clock
I
at
mean,
night.
well, it's 8:50 here. I'm willing to go to 9 p.m. Central.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay. Well, for our next question, this person's asking in reference to the class of 2020 profile slide, they're asking if you can clarify the difference between non-medical service and non-clinical experiences. Also, does the medical service include hours for clinical and shadowing?
All right. So you want to know what constitutes non-medical service versus clinical, I'm sorry,
Non-clinical experience.
versus non-clinical experience.
Right.
Okay. So non-medical service versus non-clinical experience. So our committee has evaluated work. So if you think about a non-clinical experience, that is essentially like work. Okay. Um, Work is an important factor in developing skills. So if you've had to work while you're in school or you didn't have to work while you're in school, I mean, there's a different element that you get if you had to work in school. Again, we're talking about factors of diversity, right? Are you able to build the capacity to multitask, to fundamentally have to work in order to succeed in undergrad, and you've done well while working? Again, we see one candidate who's done that. The other candidate hasn't worked at all and didn't have as much academic success. So again, we recognize that there's perhaps intangible qualities the person that did have to work involved in that. So again, non-medical experiences or non-clinical experiences often yield an understanding of the capacity for someone to work. And again, our committee is more focused on, are they working while they're in school, or are they working after they've left school, and to what capacity are they learning in that regard? As far as non-medical service, I think the most significant thing that qualifies in that realm is something that's adjacent to teaching. We have a lot of students who come to us with backgrounds of working with, young people in camps, working as tutors, working in, volunteering in schools and applying different elements of, teaching science in a school, that sort of thing. So again, I think the basic idea here is, again, someone is applying this skill in an environment where there's a lot of need. We can kind of, project this to be something that might be similar to a mission experience, right? Where, I'm going to a Title I school. I mean, maybe I went to a private school and had, great resources, and now, I'm spending time in a Title I school that's underserved, with children with maybe a mixed modality of skills in the classroom. And I've put forward an effort, and now I've seen progress. I mean, again, those are things that resonate in terms of adaptability, pushing the comfort zone. We have lots of candidates who, even on interview calls now, because a lot of the interviews are virtual, are zooming in from, Dominican Republic or, other countries where they're, invested in some activity that might be relative to teaching or some service related. activity. One young woman this week was at an orphanage in the DR, working as a volunteer. So again, those are things that demonstrate qualities and skills that, again, you can try your best to articulate by virtue of explaining the capacity of that experience and what you learned and how you were utilized and evidence those things. Because again, as has been said, if you're not able to find that opportunity to express this type of skill that you have because you're not able to get the kind of clinical experience you want to do that, now you have a path that may allow you to bring out some of those skills. Or again, if we're talking about a growth year, really trying to find out, how you can adapt in a situation like that. So again, I think there's value in all of those different experiences. I think that's more to the point of what the graphic is trying to describe. Really, leaning into some of those things and really providing that momentum for the committee to know more about your resilient behaviors. Any more questions?
Two more.
Yeah, one question is regarding international applicants. Are scholarships offered for international applicants at all? And if so, what are the eligibility criteria?
Well, unfortunately, we cannot bring a candidate into our program who's on a visa. And I've been 20 rounds with administration about that, but I won't go into those details. What we have is an opportunity for candidates to code a citizenship and a visa status. I mean, obviously, if you have a visa status, it's anything that is coded like a J1, F1, your application will not be routed to our committee. We have candidates who route their applications to us with a visa status of other. And in some cases, they might be refugee asylees. They might be, temporary protected status. We have DACA students in our program. So all of those considerations are brought into the committee structure. We typically adjudicate the committee process fairly without any kind of reference to those details. But if they're accepted, then it becomes, more important to recognize, okay, do I have the opportunity to, receive financial aid through the federal program? In our particular case, we have scholarships that are merit-based and need-based. We have opportunities for students to apply for loans. We have a designated half tuition scholarship for DACA students. One of the big issues that DACA students have beyond just scholarship is the opportunity to borrow at a reasonable rate. So we actually created an arrangement with Self-Help Credit Union so that our DACA students actually had a safe guaranteed loan at a reasonable rate of 8-9%, similar to the Grad Plus, which is going away, by the way. Blame your government. But in any case, those factors of citizenship are less germane to what we're trying to do with building our student body. And I think they're just more germane to like the financial considerations of your application. I've talked to our registrar about like the different permutations of what a candidate might have in terms of citizenship. And ultimately, if you can complete an I-9, and an I-9 has 3 categories of consideration in terms of documentation that you need. If you can complete an I-9 and cover those 3 bases, then more power to you, right? If you are not able to do that and you're accepted into our program, then I can have a conversation with you about, deferring your seat and giving you more time to adjust to a status that would give you the opportunity to come into the program so that you can receive, the aid resources that you need. So, I recognize citizenship status is a very sensitive topic, so we don't try to make any claims about, barriers, but the J1 F1 is a barrier because we simply can't process those visas in our system on our campus. Which is really interesting because they're able to do that on undergrad campus, but the capacity for us to do it, and I've explored it many times, has not yet come to fruition, but we're still hoping at some point we can do that.
And actually, Loyola was the first school in the U.S. to accept DACA students,
Yes, we were back in
and
2014.
and they were the trendsetters, and they actually, like, I remember reading something that it was based on the Jesuit traditions of,
Right.
justice. So,
Absolutely.
uh,
There's a very big social justice element to that. And we actually got our senator involved with helping to write the legislation. And obviously at the time, Barack Obama, who was a former senator in Illinois, was well aware of that work and actually was able to move it even further into that executive order. So, we feel really happy and blessed to have had over 60 students graduate from Stritch who have DACA affiliation when they came in. Many of them have adjusted to, a different status, but those 60 are all working as physicians in this country. And I think that's something I hope does not go away. I mean, there are lots of barriers and threats to that even now. But hopefully a new day will reemerge where that will not be a barrier for others.
well, there's an old Persian saying that says, "This too shall pass."
Yes. Let's hope it passes quickly.
We have one more question left if you still have time.
I'll give you one more.
Okay, sounds
Last
good.
one.
For sure. So this person's asking, so 125 per section is a 500. Isn't that 50th percentile? Can we get in with the 500 MCAT score?
Recognize I did not say 125 in all sections. I said Chem Phys and Bio. All right. And yeah, I mean, I think if your constitution of the MCAT is to have, strong outcomes in Chem Phys and Bio, I mean, again, the whole score is the whole score. We recognize where our limitations and are in terms of our training environment. We recognize that Chem Phys and Bio are important markers for success. This is not to say that we don't think that the other elements of the MCAT lead to some element of success, but we're not going to try to create additional barriers for students based on that sort of detail. And again, we actually did research on these considerations. So there is no standard cutoff for the MCAT. We have an organic process. We bring all this information in. The thing that my analysts will tell me is that there's a stronger correlation to science GPA than anything else. Again, we've got Chem Phys and Bio as indicators through research, but when the dust really settles, we think a science GPA that exceeds a 3.65 has the most validity and success towards completion of a medical degree. And of course, the higher that science GPA is, the better outcomes tend to be part of that student's experience. So, but again, like everything, research has a lot of constructs and a lot of outliers. I think in the perfect world, all those things would essentially yield the outcome we want, but we recognize that in life, there are things that happen, and sometimes those things are challenges for students to overcome. And, students obviously pick themselves up and become stronger students over time. It's the thing about standardized testing. It's not the kind of thing that's going to go away after the MCAT. It is a consistent and constant thing in medical education. It will not leave you. You go from the step 1 to the step 2 to step 3, step 4, continuing medical education,
Self exams.
Yes. So it's a permanent part of medical school. So if you struggle and you represent struggle in your application, then there's this whole idea of maleficence that's already been mentioned, which is Are we doing more harm to this person by putting them into this pressure cooker to force them to succeed when we recognize that this is a challenge for them? So that's the thing you also have to factor into your own application. Don't let us be the ones to make that decision for you, right? So again, I think that's really part of the structure of how we look at the MCAT.
All righty. Well, thank you very much for staying. We kept you longer, and thank you for answering all the questions. And I would just add to the last one is not a lot of schools give you these definite numbers like the bottom. So we appreciate you sharing that, and great seeing you again. And hopefully we'll have you come again. And I don't know how the weather is in Chicago, but
Well, it was 61 today, but it's going to be 31 tomorrow. So there you go.
yeah, uh, today here was like almost 82. So
Well, enjoy that warm weather and think of
thank
me
you,
tomorrow when
thank
it's
you,
snowing.
definitely.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Alrighty, bye
Okay.
bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.